I think we have three fantastic panelists today, and Agustina is going to facilitate the panel discussion. And unfortunately, Alison is not able to attend today due to some personal circumstances. But we have Mohammed Al Khafaji. He is the CEO of Federation of Ethnic Communities Council of Australia. Born in Iraq, Mohammed came to Australia via Syria as a refugee at the age of 13 in 2003. Mohammed lived in Iran and Syria and speaks Arabic and Farsi. He completed a Bachelor of Software Engineering at the University of Adelaide in 2012. Through his refugee journey to Australia, Mohammed has become a passionate about the success of Australia's multiculturalism. Mohammed believes cultural diversity makes us richer as a society, and he is passionate about ensuring the voices of new and emerging communities are heard and represented. He was awarded the South Australia's Governor's Multicultural Award for Youth Achievement in 2012 and was a finalist in the 2018 SA Young Australian of the Year Awards. Please join me in welcoming Mohammed. And our next speaker or panel member is Felicity Crowther. Felicity is the director of SA Council on Intellectual Disability. She has worked in a range of positions in the disability sector, including service development, project management, and service management roles. Felicity is passionate about supporting people with intellectual disability to have a voice within their community. In both a professional and voluntary capacity, she has assisted with the development of self-advocacy programs and supported individuals with intellectual disability in their self-advocacy roles. This passion for supporting people with intellectual disability to have a voice has led her to undertake a PhD in the area of inclusive research. So please join me in welcoming Felicity. Last but not least, Hanna. Hanna is a co-researcher working on inclusive research studies with Flinders University. She brings an important perspective to these studies with her lived experience as a young woman with intellectual disability. Hanna believes that it is important for people with intellectual disability to be in control of research that is about them. Please join me in welcoming Hanna. So, Agustina will facilitate the session with the panel members. Thank you.
I'm just going to have a seat here because hello. Okay. I'll have a seat here given that we are missing one panelist. Alison is very sorry she is missing today's session. Thank you, COVID. However, she did want me to share with you a recent paper that her group has published around being more inclusive with digital healthcare and just digital resources. So they asked me to just put the paper on your table. You each have one there. And you can, I think the contact information is on there as well. So for today's session, I thought it'd be great if I asked each panelist a question relating to their field of expertise or their experience. After they each respond to a question, we'll open up the discussion to the room or on the chat. So please think of questions you might want to ask the panelists after we go through the first round of questions. I'd like to start with Hanna. What are some supports that would greatly enable people with intellectual disability to engage in and co-lead research projects?
Well, I've been part of a couple of inclusive research studies so far. The first was started by Felicity. Her PhD is looking into the experience of our inclusive research team. She invited us to join the inclusive research team so that we could learn all about research and do our own research project. While we are doing this work together, Felicity is looking at our experience of being part of an inclusive research team and what the research project is like for our team. Our team has learned about research and have planned our own research project. Together we have learned a lot about what makes good inclusive research. I'm also employed by Flinders University as a co-researcher. I work on an evaluation research project, getting feedback about programs people with intellectual disability are participating in. I have some examples of what has helped me be successful in these roles. Having information in a way that I can understand is really important. I need to have information in easy read from the start. Easy read means putting information into works I understand, including pictures to help me remember what the information is about. Felicity showed us some journal articles. We're looking at what information is already out there about the topics you're interested in. It was hard to understand journal articles, basically numbers. It was important to have Felicity translate the articles into easy read summaries for us. Good support has also helped me to be a good researcher. Having someone who helps me do the things I can't and support me with the things I can. It's important for me to have a go at everything. If I don't like it or I can't do it, then Nadia, who helps me at Flinders, or Felicity can help me. They can help me understand words or academic phrases that go right above my head. They can also translate my words into academic words. They can also support me in collecting and analysing data. I like to have set questions to ask and have them there to support with asking extra things. I've transcribed interviews and focus groups and then analysed the data. We listen back to the recordings and pick out key words and phrases to sort into groups. Having time has also been important. Time to understand everything and flexibility around when we meet. Being a co-researcher has led to lots of good things. I've learned new skills around using technology like Zoom. Being a co-researcher has given me something to do. It has shown me I can achieve things. If I wasn't a co-researcher, I'd probably just be sitting at home playing phone or computer games all day. I started out in the research project with Felicity. That led me to my job at Flinders. I get paid for the work I do at Flinders. I thought I was going to do the project with Felicity as a volunteer, but she got a grant to give us gift vouchers for our time. It was also important, being paid for our time makes us feel valued and not like we are token people with disability. It was also important that we were involved in every part of the research process, and we had control. I used to be a guinea pig of research due to my disabilities. Research was done on me. I wanted to be on the other side and have control of the research for once. Research shouldn't just be about us. Research should involve us. Give us the opportunity. If you give us a chance, we can do it. We may need things adapted, but we can still do it.
Thanks so much, Hanna. That just is a perfect example of what we mean by doing research with consumers and community members. It's exactly that. You really put your finger on the pulse there. Felicity, you're my next panelist. My question for you is, in addition to being the SACID director, you're also studying a PhD at Flinders, as we just heard, on the topic of inclusive research. Could you tell us a little bit more about conducting research inclusive of people with intellectual disability and what that entails for you as a researcher?
Sure. So I might just start off by talking a little bit about what inclusive research is in the disability space. So it's been adopted a lot more in research in the disability area, and it recognises that people with intellectual disability are no longer seen as subjects of research, but rather as co-researchers. So it's developed from participatory action and emancipatory paradigms, which recognise the contribution people with intellectual disability can make in all parts of the process. And the involvement of people with intellectual disabilities in research was really initially instigated through the disability movement, which saw people with disability coming together and claiming their rights at a political level. Participating in the research process can be really empowering for people with disabilities. It facilitates a significant shift towards people being accepted as capable of providing a reliable view of their own experiences and lives. And so inclusive research is really kind of quite a large spectrum in terms of the level of involvement that people with a disability have. But it's definitely more than just having people with an intellectual disability as participants. I've read different journal articles that claim that they're using inclusive research strategies, and they've really just asked people with intellectual disabilities some questions. For research to be really inclusive, the people with intellectual disability need to have control about what it is they're studying, how the research is carried out, and what the findings mean to them. So through my PhD, as Hanna's just explained, I'm looking at the experiences of an inclusive research team. I've worked with a group of people with intellectual disability. Together, we've learned about the research process, and the co-researchers with intellectual disability have chosen our topic and designed the research study. They have had control over every part of the research process. Choosing a research topic was really difficult. But I found it really interesting that the group could decide to research anything. It didn't have to be about disability, but they all of the topics that they were interested in related to their lives. So we ended up choosing to research pets for people with an intellectual disability. So what their experiences of having a pet or wanting to have a pet and not being able to have one. And in my role at SASID, all of the work that we do is built on the principles of co-design and inclusive practice. We employ 10 people with intellectual disability as inclusion advisors, and their role is to co-design, co-deliver, and give advice from their lived experience perspective. And that helps to make sure everything that we're doing is relevant and accessible to people with intellectual disability. From my experience, there's a lot of crossover between inclusive research and co-design. So through the work with the inclusive research team and the co-design work at SASID, there are some key kind of considerations that I would suggest to other researchers or practitioners thinking about using inclusive research methods. So the first one, and I think we've heard this a lot today, is that we need to build in time for building rapport with our co-researchers. When we're doing co-design or inclusive research, it's really important to build that trust and get to know each other's strengths. We're often asking people to share a lot about themselves and their experiences, and often those experiences haven't been positive that we're asking them to reflect on. So we really need to make sure we have that relationship and trust with them before we kind of delve into all of that. And along with that is the need to consider the well-being of the people that we're working with. We need to remind them to only share as much as they're comfortable sharing with us, and we need to be aware of who else is in their support network, so that if something does come up during our work together, we know who we can connect them with if they're needing to talk more. Be prepared that you might need to educate the ethics committee if you're wanting to do inclusive research. At Flinders, I think that they've become really well educated. There's quite a number of research studies that have involved people with intellectual disability, but I know that that's not been the same for other inclusive research projects. They've had to do a lot of work with their ethics committee to make sure that they understand the capabilities of people with intellectual disability and the safeguards that can be put in place so that they can participate. Finding co-researchers with intellectual disability and finding participants with intellectual disability can be really tricky. People with intellectual disability often rely on other people to get information about opportunities, and that information can be gatekept for many different reasons. Sometimes it's because supporters don't have the time to go through the information with them and support them to respond to the opportunity. It might be that the supporters don't think the person has the capacity to be involved when actually they do. And sometimes it can just be that supporters don't want them speaking up and sharing what's going on in their lives. So I found that recruiting through existing networks with disability groups or service providers has been really helpful. I also encourage people to contact SASID and we can share opportunities with our networks, and for any kind of consumer group that you're working with, contacting the peak body is a really great way to find people to be involved. And I was really excited to hear about the registry as well. And try and ensure that you've got supports available to support the team to actively be involved in the research. So at different points in our work together, I'm always there, but I've also sometimes had my supervisor, Fiona, there if I know that we're going to need to break into teams to work on things. So it's really important to have those support people available so that people can really participate. And give all of the researchers the opportunity to participate in all parts of the research if they want to and work to their strengths. Hanna said that she wants to have a go at everything, and that's really important to her. And I think that was the same for all of the co-researchers involved. We were looking at the literature, and they wanted to see what a journal database is, how we search it, just one time. And then they were happy for me to go away and do the rest of the work, but they wanted to see what that process involved, and then I could bring it back to them and make the articles accessible to them. And last but not least is really to make sure we're reimbursing people for the time and the expertise that they are contributing. They're not just consumers, giving, on an advisory panel. They are experts they've got a PhD in their own lives, and we need to make sure we're reimbursing people for that skills and expertise that they're sharing with us. So that's really important. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thanks. That was really good. And you're right. When we engage with consumers and community members and people who have a lived experience, you're so right. They have a PhD in their own lives. They're coming with an expertise that us as researchers or clinicians or experts, quote unquote, don't have, because we haven't gone through that. So I always tell groups of researchers that I work with that we're engaging, the community and the specific communities that you want to engage with as stakeholders, as another stakeholder around the table. We work with biostatisticians or someone with a specific expertise in a really specific domain, and then we have community members who are coming with their own baggage, and that's completely true. So thanks so much for your input. Okay, Mohammed, I have a question for you. I've recently heard you speak at another panel recently, and one of your quotes was memorable. You said, "Diversity is a fact, but inclusion is a choice." Could you give us some examples of how health and medical research can be more inclusive of multicultural communities?
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Yeah, I think many people have kind of used that quote. It's a bit of an obvious fact. Australia, in the 21 census, we know that more than 51% of the population was either born overseas or we have at least one parent born overseas. It's quite a staggering number, but when we look at the policies and the program designs, they're often not inclusive of people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, or the solutions are always a pat job. It's always an afterthought when we kind of realize that we haven't included people, or this particular solution doesn't meet the needs of those people. So I think we need to kind of move away from that mindset. And I always say, if we design policy or program for the most difficult case study, whatever that may be, then everybody will be able to use that solution. You pick for example, a single mother from a refugee background with 5 children who barely speaks a word of English. Like, if that's the difficult case, use that as a case study and then build your policies and programs around that. because that's how you'll make sure not only she can use that solution, but everybody else can use it too. So I think for multicultural communities, it's really important to obviously build that network and build that trust. It's all about trust. I think a lot of the other speakers kind of spoke about it's all the same principles. It's where we kind of make the connections with community members to gain their trust to be involved in research. That's not going to come overnight with an email to say, I need 5 people with these profiles, give them to me by tomorrow morning. Like, it doesn't work like that. I think people need to build that trust, build that network over time. The sooner we start, the sooner we'll be able to kind of get that rolling. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that it's not as easy as just kind of getting someone tomorrow. And it's also not fair on other organizations who represent these people to kind of drop everything and just kind of go out there and find people for you. And I think we need to also acknowledge their time and their resources as well as the people who we're trying to kind of recruit for our own research. And I think through that, the genuineness of your engagement will come through. How you speak to people, how you engage, how you go about doing it, it comes through and people feel it. Whether this is a kind of a tick box exercise, whether it was part of a grant agreement to say you need to make sure that you meet these criteria, or you're actually genuinely really interested in working with people. So I think I'm kind of saying the bleeding obvious here, but I think it's really important. The second thing obviously is making sure we involve people early and often. I think as co-researchers or co-authors of reports, that gives them agency and it gives them ownership, which makes them go above and beyond and sharing more than what you would have if you were just to answer these questions and thank you, here's your voucher, goodbye kind of thing. I was part of one of those researchers. I'm not a researcher. I couldn't do research to save my life. But during COVID, Monash University was doing impact of COVID on multicultural communities and the engagement of the state government in Victoria at the time. And they identified a few community leaders and they were really humble with their approach to say, you guys will lead this research. We're here to facilitate. This is what we want to know. Your community is the best. And we want to kind of publish a paper that's kind of driven by these community leaders, right? So they kind of conduct a couple of interviews in a group discussion, and they were just doing the note-taking and everything. By the end of it, they published the paper, and all of us were co-authors of that research, which was really interesting because, now we're all kind of co-authors of a scientific paper, I'd like to think, which is really cool. But also that paper got recognized in one of the big international journals for best practice engagement. For those interested, it was with Professor Helen Skiteris from Monash University. So I think that's another really interesting way we can acknowledge people's time and value their input. And also I think it's important for researchers to also kind of connect with these researchers who've done this really well and pick their brain about how did you do it, why did you do it, what worked well, what would you do different? And it's a bit of a trial and error. The other thing also, don't be scared to ask questions and actually try things, because we don't want to kind of make the fact that we may offend someone be the barrier for not trying in the first place. I think if people feel like you're genuinely interested in their point of view and you're really keen to kind of include them in research, they will help you with that process. So don't be afraid in engagement. And I think that principle kind of applies in all kind of community groups that we're trying to engage with. The other thing that's important is using trusted translators and interpreters in your work, and actually valuing that and making sure there is a budget in your research for things like that. That it's not cheap, but it's important. So for example, the Australian Clinical Trials Alliance we know in medical clinical trials, often people from multicultural communities are excluded because the cost of translation and interpreting is quite high. So naturally, they kind of just say it's too hard. But then, to me, that kind of puts the validity of that study into question if you're kind of excluding a big part of the community from your study, because we know some people with different genetic backgrounds or from diverse communities, they kind of react with let's say medicines differently. You need to make sure that those people are included. So one of the things that I'm pushing hard on with the Medical Research Future Fund, so I sit on the Medical Research Future Fund Consumer Reference Panel, is to update their guidelines and update the principles to make sure that they say, people who come to MRFF for funding, you need to demonstrate how you're going to be inclusive of all communities. It used to be, I think, Aboriginal and Torres Islander, and we said, well, that's really important, but it shouldn't stop there. How do you, you need to really understand your cohort, your communities, whatever the subject matter is, identify who those communities are, and have a very clear plan on how you're going to engage with them. And I think that's really important. A lot of it is not rocket science, but it amazes me how often people don't do that initial thinking of how am I going to engage with multicultural communities, and actually writing a plan. I'm going to connect with this organization initially before I get to step 2. And then you develop as you go. But if you think that I'm just going to email FECCA or MCCSA and just request 5 consumers, that's not going to work. And be persistent. If you're genuinely interested, say, look, I really want these people. Can you help me find these people? It's really important. And we've put some money aside to compensate these people, but also to help you with your time in finding these people for us. And just being persistent, I think, is really important, because everyone's busy. But if you're persistent enough, the quickest way to get rid of you is to find you the people that you need.
Thank you so much. And yeah, you're right. And I think all 3 of you said the same thing in different words in, I guess, reflecting on one of the earlier presentations today from Canada, is that we just need to build relationships at the speed of trust. And it's really about creating that trust with the communities. I would like to open the floor to discussion now. So does anyone have any questions for our panelists, either in here or online? Yes, so please walk over to the standing mic. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kobe Calix. I do research, but I've also been involved in various projects. This is great. I wanted to build on something you just mentioned there, Mohammed, because there's that kind of co-design idea that we want to involve people kind of at the earlier stages, plus we want to fund their time in being involved in developing things, right? So it's a bit chicken and egg. So there's a project that I'm developing with a couple of people, and I guess we're already a diverse group, but then we also recognize that, as you said, trying to be all things to all people, it's like, where do you start? Where do you start going for the point of actually then moving forward? Because if we're embedding everybody in, then it kind of becomes all things to all people and doesn't quite work. So that really struck me because, so for example, it's a gestational diabetes peer support program that we're trying to get up. It's very early days, co-Indigenous led. And we'd also love to have, for example, some other ethnic groups that also are disproportionately affected. But trying to maintain that co-design Indigenous leadership while also including other people, it's really tricky to figure out, well, should we be applying for funding now to do that? Or should we be trying to find other researchers in a position to lead that first? It's a really tricky balance. So I'm just interested in your thoughts, ideally, as to how that might work.
Yeah, really good question. Interesting. I don't know in terms of, the correctness of how, it's meant to kind of go. But I think from an engagement perspective, I think if you say that, you'd like to kind of include people at that early stage and say, we'd love to, create a reference panel specifically around a particular cohort being multicultural communities with the defined, ethnic makeup of whatever that your data says, but kind of engaging those people to say, look, we're really interested in including you in this study, and we'll try and find the money. But it's a bit of a two-way street. I mean, you need to find people who are actually interested in kind of contributing to the study. You know, you can't force people to be involved, and I don't think anyone does it for the money. I don't think, you know, I mean, I think just I think the compensation bit is just to recognize people have something to give. I don't think, you know, we can pay them what they're actually worth. I think that's the main thing. That's the most important thing. Even if it's a tiny amount of something, I think that kind of opens the door to say, you're acknowledging that, you know, I'm not gonna, like, this is not for free, and I'm willing to kind of share my experience, but also I'm interested in this topic because I've seen how this affects me or my support network or my community, and they will guide you around how you do it. They'll say, don't worry, that's fine. I'm happy to contribute, and we'll help you, I don't know, put a funding proposal together or whatever. Like, they will help you kind of guide how that should be done. Now, to the question of whether it should be done separately or with Indigenous-led, I think those questions need to be put to the groups and see how they want to kind of work together, because the issues, they may be similar, they're not the same. Their experiences of First Nations people might be completely different to multicultural communities. Having said that, I think it's important to try and build commonalities and building that alliance between those communities, because I think there is a lot more common than we think. Yeah, I think we should try and at least facilitate and let the groups kind of see how the dynamics kind of pan out. Sorry, I don't know if that was useful or not.
Anyone else have any questions, or even online? I have a question. This one's for all of you. How can diversity become a priority for research organizations and research groups? So, yeah.
I think they just need to make it a priority. Yeah, I guess at SASID, everything we do is about inclusion, and we've made that really important in all parts of our work and in the way that the organisation operates. So we have people with intellectual disability who are our members. We employ people with intellectual disability. They sit on our board, and we have a reference group of people with intellectual disability. And all of our policies and procedures are in easy read. So if we're going to talk about inclusion and diversity being important, then we need to demonstrate that as well. And I think other organisations need to think about how they do that too.
Would you like to add something?
I think it can't be an option anymore not to have one in terms of diversity and inclusion strategy. So if your organisation or your unit doesn't have an diversity and inclusion strategy, then you absolutely need one. And you can't just buy it off the shelf from, let's say, I don't know, I'm not going to name an organisation that does D&I, but I think you can't, like, it needs to be done kind of bespoke for your context, for your organisation. And you can actually get help from other organisations who've done it, who've gone through that process. It's the process that actually matters, not the document that sits somewhere. I think it's the process of going from saying, I have no idea what diversity and inclusion strategy looks like, and going through that journey. By the end of it, you will realise that I wish we did this a lot earlier, and we're going to include that in everything we do. The other thing is, which is really important, I think the organisation's leadership is really important, making sure that the CEO, whoever is kind of the top, the head of that research unit, says, I want to see how you're kind of including diversity within your research proposal or engagement plan. I think it needs to come from the top, and it's all about the culture, but also progressively, I think funding sources are asking more and more about your diversity and inclusion plan and how you're going to actually include people from diverse backgrounds as part of your research. So if you don't do that, and if you don't have that, then you're not going to get the research funding that you need. I don't think anybody here fits that criteria anyway. Like in terms of not having one, I think we're kind of preaching to the converted.
Yeah, you're right. So what advice would you have for researchers who want to be inclusive of diverse populations and they're not sure how to start?
Basically, just go to organizations, groups with that particular in mind, and just ask. That's basically how I got involved.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect answer, Hannah, is just to go and talk to people about how they want to be involved and what they want to see research be about.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Culture is very important. So yes, that's what's lacking a lot of the times. It's basically, it needs to come from the top and it needs to allow that inclusion. The thing that I find, and I'll go to intellectual disability in a minute, I'd like to know what sort of samples do you have, like as in ages, genders, race, etc. Do you have various types? And the other thing is, do you have competition from other areas doing this research, or is it just primarily you doing that research in South Australia?
Yeah, so we definitely have a variety of ages involved in the research that we've done, but even at SASID, we don't have many people from culturally and linguistically diverse organisations or communities seeking out our services. So we have been working with the Multicultural Council of South Australia to see how we can get those people involved in our organisations, and we've recently got some funding to develop one of our resources for those communities. So we're trying to do more in that space to engage those groups of people. I can't remember the next part of the question.
So there's age,
yeah,
okay, and gender. So do you have different ages, different genders?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the other thing that you asked about is competition to finding.
Well, the competition is always one of the issues within all of South Australia to try and engage consumer advocates, etc., because everybody is out there trying to get the same thing, and this is where collaboration has to come into play. So, and I know, like with the cultural and linguistic diverse, it's very hard because every culture has its own thing. So it's how people are treated within those cultures to, having an understanding. So I don't understand every culture, but at the end of the day, it's just having that expression of wanting to learn about other people. Same like with the Indigenous, knowing that, everyone has their own ways of doing things. And like the Indigenous have got their own medication, their tribal medicine type thing, but they're not saying that's what's to be used, but it's to be incorporated with the Western medicine, etc. So anyway, it's just more about, trying to see where your sample, and the other thing is employment. Sorry, I'm taking you off the spot, Agustina. Employment. So with intellectual disabilities, I find that people that have intellectual disability find it very hard to get employment. So, and a lot of them get frustration, then it creates obviously mental health issues. What do you say or do with those sort of people?
I guess it's about having the right supports in the workplace and making sure the workplace is accessible. I think the majority of organisations don't have the accessibility or the support that people need. So that's been really important to us at SASID, is to set that up from the beginning. Even looking at recruitment processes, that can be one of the biggest barriers for people, is that they don't get the information about the job opportunities in a way that they can understand, or they have to complete this form online or answer these questions. So there's all these barriers even just to getting the job in the first place. So we try and remove some of those, and we work with other organisations as well to help them to look at how they can be inclusive. So we run intellectual disability awareness workshops, easy retraining, those kinds of things. And it needs to be the whole organisation that participate in those kinds of things, so that the culture in the organisation is right and everybody is there supporting the person with an intellectual disability. It's not just up to one person.
Okay, I probably want to ask the last question about like NDIS comes into play, and that is a real issue, especially if they've got intellectual disability and mental health issue. So a lot of the times, people that have both, etc., they won't get help with their mental health because they've got NDIS funding, which is discrimination at the end. So
yeah, it's a huge issue, and yeah, we're always talking to NDIS about and other kind of areas like education, health, about how they need to collaborate more, because we see people missing out on one area because they're getting the other. And it also, one of our inclusion advisors, they had funding in their NDIS plan to get support at work, so that they could develop new skills, which would then mean that they could have more hours because we didn't need to spend as much time supporting them. They could do things independently. And at their next plan, it got taken away because they already had the job. So we taught to NDIS about that. It's not just about getting the job, it's about having a career and having the opportunities to build on the skills and maintain their employment as well. So I think there's a lot that NDIS still needs to learn, and a lot of collaboration that needs to happen. Did you want to say anything about that, Hannah?
Yeah, my plan is terrible, this one.
I think you'll find a lot of the people that I know that have got intellectual disability find it so hard, and it's firstly trying to find somewhere as well. So
yeah, like
anyway,
I had a review. Basically my experience in NDIS, I had to fight to get my full disability recognised. That's a starting point.
yeah. So anyway, I'll let you go. Thank you.
I'll just make a quick suggestion. You talked about where do we find people. The Consumer Health Forum of Australia has, as part of its newsletter, they send a kind of, they've got like a consumer bureau, I think, for opportunities. So you can obviously post with them. That goes around, but obviously Consumer Health Forum, the people that read those newsletters are people who are probably quite well educated, are connected to things like that. We definitely need to get better at kind of supporting other organizations in kind of building their own kind of speakers bureau or, consumers bureau. We all need to do our bit.
Thank you. Thank you to all three. I'm just looking at the time. It's 1:30 already, and I believe that was the end of our session. So if there's no other questions from the real world or virtual world, then I'll wrap this up right now. I would just please join me in thanking Mohammed, Felicity, and Hannah. Great panel and great experiences and great insights. So thank you very much for joining us today.